Hi guys, my name is Nathalie. I talk about astrology and occult philosophy on this podcast. So join me twice a week for conversations around that topic. One is your astrology weather report, and the other is general conversations about spirituality. So I watched this documentary on Netflix, and for those of you who follow me on TikTok at Intuitive Healing, you might have seen me mentioning this in my stories that I was going to be making this podcast. It's because that whole documentary left me flabbergasted. It's really rare for me to be shocked by human behavior. I attribute that to me being a Capricorn stellium, so I have a healthy dose of skepticism when it comes to humans and the things that humans are capable of, or expecting the best out of humans. Capricorns, as you know, is a very negative energy in astrology, and I'm naturally very critical. So I don't necessarily look at the world with rose-colored glasses. And then to make matters worse, God made me, a therapist. So after working in mental health for almost 20 years, that also skewed my perspective of, the holiness of humanity as a whole. And then made me an astrologer, which definitely removes the veil all the way. So whatever confusion I had before, it's really hard for it to get hidden, now that I'm in this kind of deeply spiritual state. So with that being said, I expect the best from humans, and I also expect the worst from humans. I'm not so delusional that I think humans aren't capable of some things. I believe humans are capable of any and everything. I put nothing past any human being, because humans can do all sorts of amazing things and all sorts of horrendous things. So when I saw this podcast, when I saw this, So when I saw this documentary, I became very excited, because it's not until I fully transitioned from being a mental health therapist into being an astrologer that I realized that there were people that were using spirituality in this field to really ruin people's lives, and that were using it for, evil reasons, and that were using it to harm people, manipulate people, and, to get things out of people. And I myself have felt some of that hands-on, because there was a period of time when every week I had a fake account on TikTok that was popping up with people pretending to be me. And what would be happening is that these people would reach out to my followers. So they would go and see who follows me. Then they will follow those people. And then they will reach out to them and say, hey, I had this kind of spiritual epiphany about you, and I just want to connect with you more deeply. I want to give you a reading. I want to give you a free reading so I can share that information with you. Naturally, if you're following me and if you don't realize that this is a fake, you're going to be interested, because, here I am out of the woodworks, like zeroing in on you and saying that I've had some sort of spiritual connection with you and some sort of spiritual information to share with you. Like, if that were me, I would be excited, right? Because that's a normal human reaction. You follow me because we have a connection. So when I'm telling you that connection has been amplified, naturally, yes, you would want to know more. So that's what would happen. People will get excited. And then they will follow that up with people by saying, hey, but just as a show of goodwill, why don't you go ahead and make a donation? Why don't you go ahead and make a donation and donate, whatever you would like. And, after I receive that donation, then we'll do the reading. And people naturally are kind-hearted. I'm sure, I don't know, like, the extent to which they, talked up the donation, but I'm sure they made it seem like a worthwhile cause. So people are excited. So people want to donate. So people go ahead and, they make that donation. And what would happen after the donation is made is that this individual will disappear. There would be no reading that follows. There would be no communication that follows. There would absolutely be nothing. So then what would happen is that the individual then will reach out to me and say, hey, I made a donation, but I didn't get my reading. And I would be like, what? Huh? What are you talking about? Because, I don't reach out to anyone for any reason whatsoever. Like, I'm not here like DMing people like, hey, what's going on? I had a dream about you. Like, that is so weird. Besides, I'm too busy. For those of you who don't know, I also run a sustainable fashion shop where I sell, secondhand fashion and vintage pieces. And keeping up with that alone and, social media is quite time consuming. So when it comes to my work on social media, my hands are full, to be honest with you. And I don't have, the time outside of styledunder.com and Intuitive Healing, and me basically managing, I also have another YouTube channel where I talk about living with chronic illness because I live with lupus, at Styled Under Healing. And then as Styled Under is another YouTube channel that I have where I talk about celebrity pop culture and astrology. And of course, most of you guys know me from Intuitive Healing, where I have a YouTube account, I have a Twitter, I have a Threads, I have an Instagram. Go ahead and follow me on all those if you don't already. But my point is, when you add that to this podcast, Astrology Weekly, and a YouTube channel called Astrology Weekly, as you can see, I'm pretty busy. So the idea that I would have extra time to reach out to people individually, it's ludicrous. But then again, you guys don't know this about my life. You don't know what goes on in the back end and what all I have to be responsible for. So I could see how, at face value, it seems harmless. And more importantly, it seems exciting. You want to know more. You want to know, what did I think about you? What came up for me about you and all of that, which I totally get. But for me, learning about this was kind of like getting my face cracked. It was like I'd gotten bitch slapped, It was like I'd gotten smacked in the face. I couldn't believe that there were people in this space that were using it as a scamming tool. It never occurred to me that anyone would be this bold to play with God like this. It just never occurred to me because I have such a deep connection to spirituality and I have such a deep relationship with my creator that, there is a little bit of respect in that connection, and that respect can sometimes look like a little bit of fear. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, your parents. Like when you respect your parents, there's a little bit of fear. Like you're a little bit afraid of them because you don't want to disappoint them, right? So it's kind of like with me and God. So the idea that there were people out there that didn't have this about God and that they really thought they could do like evil things and use God's name to do it and not be held accountable and not collect bad karma and not be spiritually punished, like all of that was unfathomable. Like I just couldn't conceive of a reality where people were this ignorant about spirituality and how it works, because my babies, you can't do that. You can't do that and think that nothing bad is going to happen to you. You can't. You're literally playing with God. And in doing that, you're fracturing your brothers and sisters' relationship with God. And that's not something anybody wants, because we all need a connection to spirit to live. Like literally, spirit is where we came from, and spirit is where we're returning when we die. So fracturing that connection is like the most violent crime you can commit against a human soul. So no, I don't play with God. I don't play about God. And I don't play spiritual games with people, because I know ultimately all of us have to answer for ourselves about how we're using our time in this universe. Because obviously we're not the masters. The director is who's in charge. We're not the director. So it's important that we play our role and that we stay in our lane. I've always been very cognizant of that as a child. But then again, I've always been a spiritual person. So spirituality is not something that I take lightly. But I understand not everybody is like me. So that was kind of a rude awakening for me right at the beginning of this astrology journey. And I'm kind of grateful in hindsight that it happened, because it's made me aware of how lackadaisical people are about spirituality. It's also made me aware of how spiritually advanced I am compared to a lot of people. And it's made me aware of the fact that humans are capable of vile things, even in the name of God. And, this is something I already knew when you think about all of the wars that have ensued, because of religion. But it never occurred to me that people could literally prey on people in their vulnerable states and use religion as a mechanism through which to lure them into their trap, only to steal money from them. Like, that is not something that I ever thought was possible. So naturally, when I saw this episode, Surviving a Twin Flame, just the title alone, like Surviving Twin Flame, I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, what do you mean? Like, because I recognize the word twin flame, and I know that is a spiritual term, and I know that has to do with love. But why would you want to survive something that has to do with love? So, I was very intrigued. How to survive a twin flame? Like, what? And then it seemed like a little cultish right away. So I'm like, oh, cult? Twin, let's get into it. That's like all the shit that I like, right? Because I love documentaries. I would much rather watch a documentary than a movie, because it helps me learn more about the human nature. Again, my fascination is with the human nature. This is why I got a degree in psychology. This is like my foray into mental health. That was sort of the precursor to all of this. It's because I find humans to be very fascinating. And I'm very curious about them, like at their core, the things they do, the things they say, the things they believe, the way they behave, like all of that is very fascinating. I could spend my entire life studying humans and I still won't get it. I've spent 20 years in mental health and, went to school to study psychology back in 2002. And I still don't know a lot about humans. Like 2002, that was 20 years ago, over 20 years ago. And I'm still confused about human nature because humans are fascinating. So I got lost into this documentary and I watched all of it in one take, because the more I watched, the more dumbfounded I became, the more ridiculous it all seemed to me. But then the more vulnerable, those victims came across to me. And I just wanted to use this platform to talk to you guys about it, so you guys don't get lost in this wickedness, okay? First, I want to define what a twin flame is, so all of us are on the same page. A twin flame is not necessarily a positive love connection. A twin flame is a love connection, but let's not assume that it's a positive love connection, okay? A lot of people in the world of spirituality who do not understand the nuances of spirituality hear the words twin, hear the words flame, and they're thinking passion, connection. And yes, a twin flame is a passionate connection. However, it's not necessarily a positive, okay? It's not necessarily a positive connection, around love with another individual. It is an intense soul connection with someone, that you think of as your other half. And sometimes a twin flame is also called a mirror soul for that reason, because they will mirror you. In spirituality, a twin flame is basically somebody who shares the same soul as you. So if you want to think about twins in the physical realm, it's an egg that splits into two. Twins in the spiritual realm is a spirit that splits into two, or a soul that splits into two. Okay? So your twin flame is someone who shares the same spirit or the same soul as you, someone who has the same energetic spiritual signature as you. So when you meet them, it would feel like looking at yourself. And there is something very comforting about that. But what most people who are not skilled in the nuances of spirituality fail to acknowledge is that there is also something very triggering about that, because one of their main characteristics is that they will highlight for you, aspects of you that you don't like. And that can be both challenging and healing. So a twin flame, again, is not necessarily a love made in the heavens, like a soulmate. A soulmate is exactly that. A soulmate is somebody who is a companion of your soul, which, naturally that has a positive connotation. But a twin flame is an ambivalent connotation, because it can be either really good or really bad, or a mixture of both. As somebody that grew up in a cult, I'm very sensitive to other people being controlled, or to people not being allowed to be their true selves, people not being an individual, people not being allowed to have a voice and to be authentic. So this is part of why I'm fascinated with cult cultures, because I grew up in it, so I understand how it works. But I'm fascinated with the people that fall for it. I mean, naturally, I didn't make the decision to fall for it because I was brought into it by my parents. They're the ones who fell for it, and because I was their child, I automatically was indoctrinated into it. So as a grown adult now, looking back at that history that I share, I'm very fascinated with the type of personalities that are easily lured into, a cult or a group or a mindset that feels harmless and then suddenly becomes very controlling. So for those of you who can't tell what is a safe, spiritual environment and what is not, I just want to share some notes that I've learned from watching this documentary so that you can kind of be on high alert. Because honestly, growing up in the cult was one of the most challenging things I've ever survived. It was even harder than surviving coming out of the closet, honestly. And for me, my coming out of the closet was wrapped up into this cult mindset, so that made it extra difficult. But when I get to the root of it, it's really this spiritual connection that my parents had with this cult that really was kind of like the foundation blocks for a lot of my trauma in life. And because of that, I'm not a big proponent of religion because I see it as a tool of control. But I do not believe that there's only one way to get to the divine. I don't believe there's one way to do spirituality. I don't believe there's one way to speak to God. I believe before religion, people were speaking and hearing from God, and they were doing it just fine. A lot of religion to me is like tools that people utilize to control and manipulate others. I think a lot of it is about control, and it forces people into boxes and expectations that most people cannot live up to, and then suddenly they find themselves feeling like a hypocrite in the very religion that they claim to believe in. And it's just a trap of low self-esteem, mental illness, anxiety, depression. I haven't seen a lot of good come from it when it comes to when I compare on a global scale what religion has done for us as a human race versus the harm that is caused for us as a human race. With that being, sorry, I have to routinely stop and drink water. But with that being said, I'm not necessarily arguing that there is no benefit to religion whatsoever. I'm not saying that at all. I've met some religious people that have deeply touched my heart because I could feel that the word of God was in them, not just in their mouths, but in them. It was in every fiber of their being, and I could feel that. I could feel that in the tone of their voice when they would speak. I could feel that in the way they would walk, the way they would sit, in the gaze when they would look at me. I could feel it. So if your feelings don't matter to these people to the point where they're trying to control you and telling you who you are and what you are, then you should already know that that is not a healthy environment. That is a cult. Okay? And also, if you are somebody that is joining a religion that's claiming to be a religion but is a cult, or a group or a spiritual group that's actually a cult, I would encourage you to do your research. That's one thing I'm a big advocate of. Again, Capricorn stellium, I don't trust anyone or anything. I trust me. I trust myself at all times. So that's really the only trust that I need. I trust myself and I trust God. So when I'm introduced to something new or someone new, my first reaction is to research it. Because I don't know. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're about. I don't know anything about it. So I don't pretend to know things I don't know. And I research things that I don't know because I want to have accurate information. I also have a Virgo Mars, so naturally I'm very into the specifics. I have a Sagittarius Sun as well, but that is kind of the background of some of those nuts and bolts of how I function. Anybody that would have spent time researching what is a twin flame would have learned that the definition that this cult or this group was using as twin flame was wrong, because they were selling this idea of twin flame as your soulmate. It's like they were confounding both words. A twin flame is not a soulmate. A soulmate is not a twin flame. They were using twin flame because it's catchy, it sounds like passion and excitement and connection, and then they were really describing it as a soulmate. So if the wrong definition of twin flame is being used by your quote unquote spiritual leader, then that should alert you to the fact that your spiritual leader is an idiot. Okay? If your spiritual leader is such an idiot that they do not know how to define the very term that they're using to try to lure you into their cult, then that, my dear, should make you run for the hills. But it's clear that none of these people who fell for this ever Googled the word twin flame. The other thing for me that was immediately a red flag, they're called their group or their cult Twin Flame Universe. Okay, for me, the word universe is too outer worldly. Twin Flame Universe, like, what do you mean? You're not a universe, my God. You are a cult. You're sitting in your house on a Zoom call indoctrinating people. Anybody that calls anything they do a universe should be scary for you. It's not even university. I would have been okay with Twin Flame University, because that basically elicits the fact that we're all learning something here. And when we're learning, there's room for us to be wrong, right? Because we don't know until we know. But universe is a little too all-encompassing for me, especially for someone that clearly does not know how to define the word twin flame. Thirdly, if you're not sure if you're in a cult, look at the credentials of your leader. These people are painting themselves as experts of love, but what are their credentials in understanding love? Do these people have a master's in understanding human behavior? Do these people have an undergraduate degree in understanding human behavior? Do these people have a PhD in understanding human behavior? Are these people psychiatrists? You know, what are their credentials when it comes to the psychology of humanity, of humans? And, you know, like the leader of this group has an MBA. He went to business school. Business school is about how to run a business, presumably about how to make money from running a business. What does that have to do with understanding the psychology of human behavior? Before you trust anybody to give you any type of leadership in any field, you should be looking at their credentials. Who trained this person in this field? Who else can vouch for their knowledge? Who else can vouch for their expertise? What is their credential? What is their licensure? What is their certification? What is it? I don't know about you, but maybe it's that because I'm not trusting, but I Google my therapist before I even take on a therapist. I Google my primary care doctor. I research the people that I entrust with my health. I can't just go by what you say, like, because who are you? I don't know you. I don't know you. And I don't know how any of you trust people that you don't know. And you know, back to the scammers that were using my TikTok to scam people out of money. That is precisely the reason why I now use my full name on TikTok and on my social media, is because I want you guys to feel comfortable Googling me. Because I am who I say I am, so I have nothing to hide. I don't care that you Google me. Please Google away. It's important to me that I differentiate myself from the people that are trying to be me. There's only one me. I'm one of none. I got here authentically, purely by divine intervention. I'm not even like someone that likes being this open. Did I not tell you that I'm a Capricorn stellium? That means I am private. I like watching much more than I like being watched. That's why I became a therapist, because I love watching much more than I like being watched. So this whole second leg of my career on this earth is purely divine intervention, purely divine calling, because this is not what I would prefer. Me being a social media personality is not what I would prefer. I would much prefer being in the background, watching somebody being a social media personality. But God is like, no, I need you to step into the Sagittarius Sun energy, and I need you to be out there. So this is how I came here, because I already had a very successful career in mental health, making really good money. I was already fine. There was no desperation. There was no need to look for a second career. I came here because I felt a spiritual calling in my life to go deeper. And when my chronic disease came, lupus, which I talk about on Ntuitive Healing on YouTube, it literally broke me. But it broke me in the best way because it broke my ego. It broke my facade. It broke this, this desire to identify myself with my accomplishments in life. I used to be very accomplishment driven, very ambitious. And I still am, but it's a lot more regulated now by my sensitivity. There used to be a time when I didn't care about how I felt. Excuse me, I cared more about what I did and what I accomplished than I did about what I felt, meaning that there used to be a time when I would disregard my true feelings for the sake of productivity. I spent the majority of my life living this way. And when lupus came, it just took that away. And it made me more honest. And it's not that I thought I was a disingenuous person before. It's that I felt under a lot of pressure to perform and to achieve. And on my path to become a high performer, I didn't care much about my overall well-being. And lupus came to teach me that this is what happens when you disrespect yourself. You invite a state of disease. And that's what that looks like. That's a hard lesson I had to learn. But at the same time, I'm grateful for it. Because lupus broke me in the best way. It made me more vulnerable. Now I cry on the internet. If you would have told me that I would be crying on the internet 5 years ago, I would have called you a liar. Because I was such a closed book. So this is a whole new part of my healing that I didn't even realize I needed, that God called me to and that I responded to. Me being the spiritualist, being into this world of spirituality and astrology. Growing up into a cult, I grew up very religious, but I've always had a deeply intimate relationship with God outside of that religion because I knew that everything they were teaching wasn't resonating with me, but I knew there was a reason God birthed me in that family. So I was always open to learn what spiritual lessons that came to teach me. So again, back to credentials and back to authenticity. People that are not authentic like to hide because they're not who they say they are, and they hope you don't discover them. People that are authentic don't mind being seen because they are who they say they are, and they hope you see them. That's the difference. And this is why I talk about my credentials, even though me being a therapist has nothing to do with me being an astrologer. I want my clients to know that in full disclosure, because I want them to know that if they're coming to get a reading with me, hoping to run a bunch of bullshit because they're looking for me to stroke their ego, they picked the wrong astrologer. Because my background in mental health and therapy naturally makes me well adept at being able to read your intentions and read what you're hiding. And I'm very observant. So if you don't want to be perceived, don't come to me. So that disclosure really was coming from a place of me letting you know that I have more skills than the average astrologer. Therefore, the egotistical games that you play with the others are not going to work with me. I needed you to know that before coming to me for your own emotional protection. Because one thing I'm going to do is rip that veil off your face and expose you to you. And if you don't want to see you, then don't come talk to me because I don't know how to fake the funk. That's why I did that. And I also did it because I wanted you guys to know that I have a background in working with people. Yes. Is it in a different format? Yes. Is it in a different setting? Yes. A lot more medical model, hospital setup. But nonetheless, I understand how to communicate with people. And I'm very good at asking questions that elicit the answers that people need to hear for themselves. So yes, Google away because I am who I say that I am. And I don't have to pretend to be something that I am not because who I am is already great. Which takes me to my next point. Whenever people in their spiritual community go by a name other than their birth name, that always raises a red flag for me. So these are all red flags to me. Wrong definition of twin flame, calling yourself a universe, having credentials, not having the credentials to be able to speak on the subject matter, not having the education to be able to speak on this subject matter, and then going by a name different than your birth name. I, again, grew up in a deeply religious, spiritual home. I've never felt the need to call myself anything other than by my name. My name is the name that my parents gave me. It's the name that God allowed my parents to give me. It's mine. I identify with it. Why would I want to be called anything other than my name? Anybody who wants to be called, excuse me, anyone who wants to be called anything other than their name always scares me in the world of spirituality. Because to me, it's almost like they're masquerading. Why do you have on a mask? You should want to look at me in my eyes, and I should want to look at you in your eyes. So when you're going by a name other than your name, to me, that's a red flag. Yes, you may have very good intentions, but it raises questions for me. Who are you? How did you get here? What makes you good at this? Why should I trust you? Why should I listen to you? What is your experience that makes you qualified to give me this advice? These are answers that I need, and I'm not going to get these answers if I don't even know who you are. So no, I do not trust spiritual people who do not go by their name. That's just my thing. Is that right or wrong? No, that's just my opinion. I like to know who you are. If you're a minister, tell me your real name. If you're a preacher, tell me your real name. If you're a mental health therapist, tell me your real name. I need to know who you are, because what I know about healing work is that your culture, your religion, the life you've lived, all of that you bring with you to the therapy process. So if I don't know who you are, I don't know what you bring with you. I need to know what you bring with you before I choose to exchange my energies with you. Another red flag is immaturity. The other thing about this documentary is that the husband literally looked like a 12-year-old. I couldn't fathom taking advice and knowledge and wisdom and life guidance. Myself, as a woman in her early 40s, I could not fathom taking that kind of advice from someone that looks like a 12-year-old. The husband literally looks like a child. And he's obviously younger than me. And that's not to say young people are not worthy of advice giving. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I could not take spiritual advice from someone with all of that background that I just discussed. You have an MBA. Why am I taking religious advice from you? Why am I taking mental health advice from you? Why am I taking relationship advice from you? And on top of that, you look like a 12-year-old. No, it's a hard pass. Come to find out, 10 years ago, this guy had several sites where he was selling a cure for cancer. So he moved from selling a cure from cancer to selling true love. That doesn't raise a red flag for you? That doesn't make you concerned? And he claims to have spiritual powers to be able to basically change the definition of a twin flame. That doesn't make you concerned? Let me tell you about some of the horrible things this guy and his woman have done. And by the way, as far as I know, she has no degree in anything related to mental health, anything related to human behavior, anything related to spirituality, none whatsoever. So both of them are not informed. Both of them are not trained. Both of them have never had to go through a body of licensure that has to ensure that they're doing things according to the highest level of ethics, which, by the way, is what sets me apart from other astrologers, is because of my mental health background and because of my licensure as a mental health professional for many years, I've had to subscribe to the highest level of ethics to be able to practice. There is a body, an educational body that basically regulates my practice and regulates my behavior in relationships with other people in practice with me. These people have no safety rails. They have no guidelines. They have no body that they have to answer to. They have no code of ethics, no accountability. It's a wild, wild west out here, ruining lives left and right, and basically washing their hands off of it. This couple had a young girl at 19 years old move across state lines and after asking a guy to move in with her. She asked a guy to move in with her at 19. And she was told that she reached harmonious union with that guy. These people were told to abandon their physical family because their soul family is their real family. They were told to sever their ties with their physical family. And for those of you who are confused about what a cult is, that is a main staple of any cult. I mentioned to you guys earlier that I was raised in a cult. My parents were told to sever their ties with their physical families in favor of their religious family. That's how I was raised. My parents kept their connections with their physical families, but it was very superficial. It was not deep connections. They were not bonding with their physical families. They were responding to their needs when they needed them, but that was the extent of it. Another thing is, twin flames is not your only lover. That's something they were teaching people, that your twin flame is your only one and true love. And they would tell these people that anyone that said anything bad about the relationship that you're with is somebody you need to distance yourself from, because this person is an energy leak. And they would tell them, if someone doesn't agree with your love story, if someone is not supportive of your love, that person is an energy leak. You need to abandon them. That guy's name was Jeff. He encouraged some of these girls to believe that their biological families were abusive and that they needed to end their relationships with them. And in order for them to come into spiritual alignment, they needed to end those relationships. Another girl called Marley met a criminal online who was on probation at the time when she met him. He was on probation for 11 months. So Marley met a criminal who was on probation for 11 months. And at the time, he was living with, a mental health disorder that had psychotic features and borderline features to it. She was only 19 years old, and he was 11 years older than her. They got these two to be in partnership together and to get married. Do you know how dangerous that is? To get a 19-year-old to go live with somebody that has an unmanaged mental health issue and that is currently on probation as a criminal? Another couple, Keely and Colby, agreed to get married after only knowing each other for 2 months. And as you can imagine, that was a tumultuous relationship. That's another thing about cults. One identifying factor of a cult is that they will get very involved in who you marry, how you marry, and how soon you marry. There's a lot of control around marriage and relationships, okay? That's something that I personally grew up in. My parents have been trying to get me married since I was 15 years old, if you can imagine that. Because marriage is like the peak of your spirituality, and there's a lot of control around that. And a lot of this is also controlling women's sexuality. And that's why I openly talk about sexuality on my TikTok now. It's very healing for me as a lesbian to talk about sexuality, because this is kind of the control of the emotional damage that was done to me from growing up in that family, is that my sexuality did not belong to me. Okay? One of them had an ex who filed a restraining order against her. And this story was so crazy because this guy told her she didn't want to be with him. She went to this cult and they told her that guy was her twin flame and that she needed to go reconnect things with him and establish that connection with him by any means necessary. This is a guy that abandoned her after she had an accident and needed surgery. This is how little he loved her and how little he thought of her. And they told her she needed to make it work with that person because he's the love of her life. And they pressured her to pursue that relationship at all costs. Needless to say, she ended up getting arrested later after she violated that restraining order for finding herself at the same club as him. Meanwhile, prior to the arrest, she had tried numerous times to establish connection with him, and he basically told her to stop because he didn't want her. So these people were basically turning women into women that were harassing men that didn't want them. Another message that they receive is that if your man wants sex, you need to give him sex. You need to force him to have you need to basically force yourself to have sex with them. You need to be having sex with them every day. And even if you're not in the mood and you don't want to have sex, you need to have sex with them every day. Mind you that sometimes women have their periods and are in pain and don't want to have sex. But this cult is teaching them they need to be having sex daily. Another thing that's very peculiar, for those of you that cannot recognize when you're in a cult, is that the leader of the cult, the wife, would generally be more or less silent in the presence of the husband. So basically when they're together, he's talking more than her. He holds space when they're together. She talks more when he's not there, but when he's there, she talks a hell of a lot less. So that's another thing to look for. And she would also always repeat what he says. It's like the longer they stayed in the cult, the more she lost her personality. And the more she became like he's somebody that was like a carbon copy of another. So whatever he says, she repeats, but she doesn't formulate thoughts of her own anymore. The girl that ended up being arrested for harassing that guy, that ex that didn't want her, that took a restraining order against her, she actually got arrested on her 30th birthday for multiple attempts of communicating with him, even after he took the restraining order. She found herself in jail for a month, and while she was in there, the family that she had abandoned, that they told her to abandon, is the one that she finally reached out to rescue her. Do you think that cult came to her rescue? No, they did not. Another thing that happened with this cult is that they were pressuring people to stay in unhealthy relationships. You know, these girls would come back and they would say, my partner is mentally unstable. My partner has a mental illness. My partner is emotionally abusive. My partner and I are not getting along. And they would tell these women to keep working at it. And it was better for them to stick it out. And people felt pressure to stay in an unhealthy relationship. And people then felt pressure to start acting like the relationship was way better than what it was. People felt pressured to fake the funk. That's another thing that happens in cults, is that there's a lot of control from the top down. So therefore, there's a lot of control in the house. So then people start basically policing other people's behavior within the cult. So even when behind closed doors you're unhealthy, you act like you're healthy in front of people, because it's really important what the cult and the cult leaders think of you, and also the other cult members. Because remember, these people have severed your relationship with your actual family. So at this point, they're all that you have. So you don't want to do anything that can get you kicked out of the cult. Because if you get kicked out of the cult, you basically end up with nothing and no one. And you don't want that. Because when that happens, like, what does life look like? You've given up your career. You've given up your family. You've given up your community. You've given up everything you believe in. And in the case of some of them, you've given up your identity. What do you have to go back to? Nothing. So it's really important to make this work, because this is essentially all you have left. So you can't risk losing it. So if it means having to pretend that your relationship is more happy than it is, and that you're following the cult leaders' rules by making a toxic and unhealthy and abusive and traumatic marriage work, that's exactly what you do. These people would advocate for you to pursue your twin flame by any means necessary. So even if behind closed doors you were being beaten by this person, you can talk about it because you had to look good. Because if you talked about it, you would be blamed for it. It would be like, you're not praying hard enough. You're not trying hard enough. You're not believing enough. You're not doing your healing work enough. Basically, it would end up being your fault. So if you're being abused, it's because you did something wrong. It's your fault. And that's why you're being abused. So therefore, there's no point in complaining, because what would happen is that you would get hurt some more, because you would get traumatized some more. You would get devalued some more. You would get called names some more. You would get judged some more, and you would be made to feel worthless. There is literally nothing good that comes out of you raising your hand and saying that things are not going well. At some point, these cult leaders started getting their members to work for free. That's another telltale sign of a cult, is that they encourage you not to pursue higher education and instead work for them, but for free. It's another way to further basically indoctrinate you and wrap you up into this lifestyle so that you're essentially incapable of having or imagining a world outside of them. So at some point, they bought this land, they made all these trailers where these members were living in, and these members were now working for them for free. They were running their social media group. They were doing editing work for them. They were doing graphic design work for them. They were getting them to go around the internet to look for people that were desperate, people that were needy, people that were scared, people that were looking for love. people that felt like they were seeking something that they couldn't currently find. That will get them to go scour the internet, look for people that are just been broken up with, and send them different links about this twin flame university to get people to buy into this idea that they could get their old love back. And because naturally people are sad and desperate, they will buy into it, and then they will set them up to recruit more, basically to get them indoctrinated and get them to recruit more members. It is a nicely oiled, toxic machine. So naturally, at some point, all of them lose all of their money-making abilities outside of the money that they get from this cult. So they turn their business basically into a religion at some point to avoid paying taxes. So they became a church as a way to avoid paying taxes. And it wasn't even something that happened naturally. Is that they literally created a church to avoid paying taxes because churches are tax-free. And they knew that. Because of his MBA, he's always looking for ways to make more money. Starting a church to make money is already working against the very thing that we're trying to do. While I understand that churches make money, I'm pretty sure that is not the reason why most churches were started, okay? Then one of them had a gay boy who rejected her because he was gay and moved in with a man, but they were pressuring her to get him back no matter what. Imagine dating some guy and you make out with him, and after making out with him, he tells you, this is not it. This feels like kissing my sister. I don't want to see you romantically because I don't feel any sexual chemistry, right? And then later you find out that he's in a relationship with a man that he moved in with and that they're living together. But imagine being the girl that still is harassing him because you want him back. How toxic is that? Like, how mentally ill do you have to be to think that you can convince a gay man to be in a heterosexual relationship with you? And then there's the emotional and verbal abuse. The leader called one of the members a whiny little bitch one time when they were talking about their problem. And he called another a dirty little filthy rat. Like, what? I know when you're outside of a cult, it seems like unimaginable that you would be okay being called things like that. But let me tell you, when you live inside a cult and you're in a cult, you get so indoctrinated that you become so comfortable accepting so many things that a normal human will not accept. Emotional abuse at the hands of your spiritual leader. That is insane. One of them, and like when they decide that they no longer want you because you're rebellious and you're not listening to their guidance, they just fire you and block you. They don't even like properly fire you. It's not even like a conversation that you will get in corporate America. They just, take back your privileges and block you off of everything. Another thing to look out for when you're dealing with a religious cult or a religious fake is that they usually have one answer for everything. If you're a therapist, and you probably know this because I don't know who all listens to this, but if you're a therapist, one of the things that happens in therapy or in therapy school, when you go to therapy school, they'll tell you that oftentimes your perspective will determine what the right intervention is. So basically, when your perspective is not wide and you're too close-minded, what would happen is that you would close yourself off to the possibility of other answers because you've already honed in on the fact that this is the problem, right? So as a therapist, one of the good aspects of being a therapist when you're good at what you do is that you keep an open mind because you understand that you don't know everything. And as you go along, things can change. As an example, you could see a client. Generally, you have to diagnose a client 3 days after seeing them. So you submit the information to the insurance for reimbursement because unfortunately, insurance won't reimburse without a diagnosis. So I said 3 days, but I mean like 3 times. But usually a therapist has to send in information to get reimbursed. Some can send it after 3 days of seeing them if they want to get the insurance ball rolling right away. Some like to see the client like a couple of times, 3 times before they send it to the insurance because they're more concerned about having an accurate diagnosis. Because naturally, when clients come to see you, they don't tell you everything right away. They will let the information trickle in. After working with a client for a year, the level of viewpoint you'll have on the problem is going to be much different. than seeing that client for a day or 3 days, right? So we like to keep an open mind. That is when we're good at what we do, because we know we don't know anything, and we know new data can contradict what we currently know. And a good therapist is going to adjust. When you're dealing with somebody who is claiming to work with human behavior, but the answer that I give to every problem is the same, that should be a red flag. The mirror exercise was the answer to every emotional and psychological problem a person can have. You could come to them and say, my husband, is diagnosed with schizophrenia. He's not taking his medication. And they would tell you, do your mirror exercise. And then when you come back to them and you say, it's getting worse, things aren't getting better, they'll tell you you're not trying hard enough. You're not healing hard enough. One girl ended up committing suicide after asking for help and not receiving it. She was told that she wasn't working hard enough on her healing. That is so sick. And I fundamentally believe that these people are going to pay for what they did. But for those of you that are subject to falling into this, I just wanted you to know that this is how bad it can get. Anytime you're being cast out or asked to not speak with people that you used to know before you joined this group, that should be a red flag. Okay? Anybody that's trying to control your life or your identity, that should be a red flag. The other thing that happened is that the goalposts started changing. At first, they were bringing people in to get them to reconnect with their ex. Then they started a matchmaking service by matching people with other community members. And naturally, because they were attracting more women, they started changing people's identities. Basically, they convinced some of these women that they were divine masculine. Therefore, these women needed to actually physically change their bodies to become men. They got these women to change their name to masculine men. They got some of these women to start taking hormones and get top surgery so they can become men. How crazy is that? As a queer person, that sets my hair on fire. The idea that you can convince straight people to identify as queer, that's the first step, because these were straight women that were looking for men. Because the whole reconnecting with your ex-boyfriend stuff became treacherous for them, people getting arrested and stuff. They decided to make straight women into queer women and into trans women, because it's layers to it. And then suddenly, these straight identifying women were going by names like Dan, and had beards, and had a different tone to their voice, and now identified as men. So it became later about control. It became about having more control of the population by changing the population into men, because we didn't have enough men. Telling people that their sexuality and gender expression, telling people what their sexuality and gender expression should be is morally wrong. This is why we do not agree with conversion therapy. This is why conversion therapy is illegal in so many states, because it is psychologically damaging. This is basically the reverse of conversion therapy, which is crazy because I didn't even know that was possible. So basically, these people were kind of forcing this alignment with heteronormativity by judging and shaming members' gender and sexual expression. Realignment of their gender and sexuality was like the next power move for them by forcing these straight women into lesbian relationships. They started doing arranged marriages between women. These are women that identified as straight women. Excuse me. These are women that identified as straight women. Some women were forced to cut their hair, change their pronouns, mate with women, have sex with women. These women felt they could not say no because they would be kicked out if they did not agree. All of this because these women were promised a divine union, and these women were desperate for love, and they wanted to feel love. This form of conversion therapy made them feel afraid of being rejected, even though some of them didn't agree with the new gender expression and sexuality that were being given. Some of them were forced to have children. The members would pick a sperm donor for them so that they could have children. So basically then they moved on to breeding their own people. These people were so deeply indoctrinated that they had to have surgery, that they had to mate and breed children that didn't want, that they had to transition through hormone replacement therapy to take on identities they didn't want. All this while being forced to look happy, and meanwhile they're coerced to basically portray an identity that is not their own. For those of you who are concerned or confused about scams or concerned about being scammed in the spiritual world, these are some red flags to look for. These are things that I want you to be mindful of. These are things that I want you to be aware of. These are things that I want you to monitor when you're in these kinds of situations. Because, believe it or not, humans have found ways to be corrupt, even in the realm of spirituality. Okay? I know for some of us, spirituality is supposed to be this holy place, but I need you to know that any place where you bring humans, there is a risk of dark energy to come along with it, because humans themselves are a mixture of light and darkness. Only God is full of light. Only God is pure. Only God is without flaws. But humans have both. And depending on how they're vibrating, they can entertain the light or the darkness. This guy was clearly motivated by becoming a billionaire, as he stated in that documentary numerous times, and he was not above doing any and everything to get there. And while I understand that there's some people that live that way, no judgment here, what I want you guys who are in the spiritual realm to understand is that there are people like that out there. So when you're interacting with the world of spirituality, you need to interact with it, keeping your mental health in mind. Because if you're part of a religious programming that basically causes you to feel more emotionally, psychologically, and physically unbalanced, then you're not where you need to be. Because God's word, spiritual alignment should feel healing. It doesn't mean it comes without challenges, but it certainly should not be a challenge that literally breaks your psyche. It shouldn't be a challenge that asks you to be something that you're not. It shouldn't be a challenge that asks you to harass that ex that told you they don't want you, so you end up getting incarcerated. It shouldn't be a challenge that asks you to become a Dan when you were a Danielle, and you like being a Danielle. It shouldn't be a challenge that basically forced you to separate yourself from your mom and dad and brothers and sisters. Anything that allows you to indulge in behaviors that are anti-human, which is basically avoidance of social connection, that's anti-human, that should be a huge red flag among all the other red flags that I mentioned. So be safe out there. Keep your eyes open and be very choosy about who you trust. More importantly, look at their credential, look at their history, and make sure that you know who you're dealing with, because a lot of people will use your vulnerability against you for their purposes. And if you're not aware enough, cognizant enough, critical enough, non-trusting enough, you're going to fall for it. And luckily, some of these women were able to get out, but there's still some that are still in it. And this group is still very much so active. You could join today if you wanted to. So I'm making this to say, stay safe out there. Okay? Don't trust people simply because they tell you that they're doing the work of God. You need to make sure before you give them power over your life. Because once you relinquish your autonomous power to another being who's like you, you've already lost. Because somebody that is looking to help you shouldn't want to have power over you or to control you. Anybody who wants to control you and have power over you is someone you should not trust. Do you have any experience with cults? Have you grown up in a cult like I did? Do you know anyone that grew up in the cult, or know of anybody who's ever been in the cult? I want to hear from you. Let me know what you think. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. Bye-bye.